guys, Kate Graham from Catalyst Kennels here to show you an alternative method to shaping that nose touch indication behavior on the washer. When possible, I like starting my dogs on the method that Nick showed yesterday with that item directly on the ground and rewarding that dog for putting effort into putting their nose towards it and keeping their nose on it. Sometimes though, that method can be a little bit harder for some dogs or handlers to achieve. So just like any behavior, there's a bunch of different ways to teach it. And there's no right or wrong method. It's just whatever works best for each dog and handler. So I found for dogs that have a lot of foundation in any type of paw awareness behaviors, so dogs that have done paw pods for conditioning exercises, a lot of our agility dogs who have a lot of foundation in that 2-on, 2-off contact behavior, dogs that we've taught to do any kind of a paw touch, that washer on the ground can be really tempting for them to paw at and can get frustrating for all of us because they're doing a lot of paw touching behavior and they think they're correct in it. And then also for dogs that have a lot of foundation in obedience exercises or focus setups where we have items on the ground that we are purposely working through as a distraction and working on eye contact while there's a variety of items on the ground. Those dogs can be really persistent in keeping eye contact and they really don't want to engage with the item that's down there. So another method that we can use for dogs that are having a little bit of trouble with that item on the ground is to move the item laterally. So anytime we're going to have an item on the ground, it's much more likely that that dog is going to paw and scratch at it. It's an easy behavior to do. As soon as we move that item laterally, it's much harder for the dog to paw and scratch at it, and they're much less likely to naturally offer that behavior. So when we have dogs that have a little bit of trouble with that item on the ground at first, I will take my washer, and I usually start directly on a washer for this. I'm going to put it in my palm, and I'm going to move it laterally. So it's kind of straight up and down. You can hold it with your thumb a little bit if you need to, and it's going to sit right there. And then I'm going to play kind of an it's your choice game with the dog. So I'm going to have my kibbles ready, or treats, whatever you're using. I like to use a clicker. You can use a verbal marker too if you want, but with this method, I definitely would use a marker. So what my plan is going to be, I'm going to have my hand with my washer out here, my food right here, accessible to the dog, whatever. I'm going to let them come in. We are going to start in a pretty blank and boring area. Anything shaping wise, we want to keep the environment pretty obsolete from anything while we're starting it. Because we want that dog to work through self-discovery to figure out the correct behavior. And if there's a lot of other things to discover in the environment, then they're less likely to figure out the thing we want them to do. So I'm going to start in a quiet environment. I've got my washer here and ready. I'm going to have the dog come in. Any move they make to begin towards my hand and my washer, I'm going to mark and feed. It doesn't necessarily matter where you feed the dog. If you've properly created a marker, that dog should understand that the mark means that food is coming. So we want to make sure we mark very precisely for when the dog is moving its nose towards that washer, click and reward. You could also use a verbal marker if you want. And what we're going to do with this, what my plan is going to be, is that the dog puts its nose on the washer and I get a little bit of duration, only about a second. As soon as I've got that behavior down and the dog is doing that well, I'm going to start moving my hand in small approximations towards the ground. So we're going to move lower and lower and lower until eventually I've got the washer and my hand on the ground. When the dog's doing that very well, consistently, and not using a paw, they're going right to putting their nose there to touch it, then I can start to move the washer to being on the ground. If you need your hand there at first, you can do that. And then we're going to fade that hand out of the picture entirely. Obviously, this takes a little bit more fading to do, which is why I prefer that method with the item right on the ground if we can achieve it. But for some dogs, it's just not going to work well for them. It's going to frustrate them, and it doesn't make sense. So in that case, there's always another way we can do it, and this is how we're going to start.